Dr. Shea, welcome to Border Zone.
Thank you.
How do you assess the current status of Georgia's cooperation with NATO, and on what extent does Georgia meet the standards of the alliance?
Well, there was a famous song of the Beatles back in the 60s, which is, "It's getting better all the time." And I think this is a good description of NATO-Georgia relations. We're doing more and more. We've got a greater presence here, as you see now, with our NATO liaison office, our Joint Training and Evaluation Centre, Defence Institution Building School. I sometimes joke that I see more of my NATO colleagues in Tbilisi than I do back in Brussels. And it's not just trips and aircraft going in both directions. I think in terms of the defence reform of the Georgian armed forces, working together in the Black Sea, working together in Afghanistan, we're really making excellent progress. And I think the NATO summit in July will really recognise and reflect that good progress.
Lukoff's recent report has stated that it might be easier for Georgia to join the alliance without Article 5 on collective security for occupied regions. Do you agree that Georgia is not being included to alliance not because of non-compliance with the standards, but because of the occupied territories and the danger of clash with the Kremlin?
Well, two things here. Number one, I welcome the fact that intellectuals and academics are writing papers on how can Georgia become a NATO member. We need that kind of intellectual debate. Too many people go around saying, oh, it's never going to happen. And we need to counteract that with arguments as to how it can happen. So I welcome the debate. That said, I don't believe that every idea that this debate will produce is a good idea. Sometimes we need to look at the bad ideas and then identify the good ideas. And I do not believe that we can have a Russian veto which suggests that certain parts of Georgia can be a member of NATO and other parts can't. Would Russia then say that Ukraine could be a member of NATO, but not the Donbass or not Crimea or not Luhansk? I don't believe that this is in the interest of Georgia. It certainly wouldn't be in the interest of NATO. We recognise one Georgia, not many Georgias, and it's the Georgia within its internationally recognised borders. So I don't think that it would be a good deal for Georgia, not in the long term. And NATO's commitment is to defend all of the country, not part of the country. So I welcome that Luke is looking at ideas. They're good. Let's have a debate. But I don't think that this is his best idea.
Don't you think that such kind of debates or public statements from very authoritative American institution on including Georgia without this Article 5 occupied territories could be used for propaganda, as a very good tool for propaganda?
Well, again, I welcome the debate because you do hear voices to say that Georgia is too far from NATO to be a NATO member, or Georgia could be a country difficult to defend. I've heard these things before. They were said about West Berlin in the 1940s not being a NATO member. We had West Berlin in NATO for 40 years and it was defended. People said, the Baltic states can never join NATO.
People in Georgia listen to such kind of news, they feel some weakness of the NATO.
NATO is not a weak organisation. NATO is a very serious organisation. The fact we have so many people in NATO here on the territory, that we're doing so many different things, exercises, training, courses, deployments together, I think it shows you that NATO is a serious organisation. But the occupied territories are part of your country. And if they would not join NATO when Georgia would join NATO, that would obviously, I think, also carry a price, which NATO does not think would be a good idea for Georgia, and I don't think that the Georgian government would be prepared to accept that too. So, no, I think that we've got very good arguments that we can make, and the best way to defeat the Russian propaganda is by giving people the facts and by giving people the good arguments, and that's exactly what I'm here in Tbilisi to try to do.
You just said that NATO is not weak, but in Georgia, according to NDI polls, more than 41% believe that Russian military force is stronger, is greater than the military force of the United States. And about 23% of respondents, they believe that Georgia is already a member of the NATO. Do you think that this is a consequences of propaganda, and does NATO help Georgia to develop some strategy to counter the propaganda and promote Euro-Atlantic integration?
I certainly think that these kind of polls show how important NATO's information work is in Georgia, like in all of our countries, particularly with people subject to so much fake news and so many different TVs. So yes, we need to keep that up, and you're here today, you're doing this interview here now in this NATO EU information office, which is playing a very, very big role. Absolutely. Number two, there's a poll that you did not mention, which is the 65+% of Georgians want to join NATO, and that's a bigger number than the numbers you quoted me. Yes, the Russians are very active, of course, with their propaganda, their fake news, playing on whatever they think is a division, and we need to do a better job of counteracting that. But I think the biggest piece of information is no argument, it's facts. And when Georgians look round and actually ask themselves, who is really benefiting our security? Who can we trust? Who are our real friends? Who are really there for us? Who are we working with? It's not Russia. That's crystal clear. It's all of these NATO soldiers, all of these NATO civilians who are here helping you.
But they still believe that Russia is stronger than the United States.
Well, if you look at the factors, take the Russian economy. What percentage of the US economy is the Russian economy?
No, I know that the budget is 10 times bigger.
Take a lot of things. I don't think that it is possible to sustain the argument that Russia is the equivalent of the United States in terms of weight and power in international relations. But no complacency. If there is a poll that suggests that Georgians feel that, I don't know, because often people sort of give the answer that related to the way in which the question is phrased, and polls do not test people's real knowledge. But that said, these are always good wake-up calls for all of us to decide that maybe we need to redouble our information and public diplomacy. And in a couple of weeks, we'll have some more NATO information days here in Georgia, which will give the Georgians plenty of opportunity to ask us those questions and for us to give the answers.
You just mentioned in other polls about the support to the NATO or European Union. According to last polls this year, support for joining the Euro-Atlantic structures has slightly decreased, and the pro-Russian direction, support for pro-Russian direction, slightly increased, 2%, as I remember. Do you link this fact with 10 years of expectations of Georgia's NATO membership?
Well, I would say three quick things. Number one, 2% is less than the 3% statistical margin of error of any opinion poll. So it's not significant, number one. Number two, if you're the Prime Minister and you're elected in Georgia tomorrow with 65% of the vote, you would be ecstatic. You would consider that to be an absolute majority. So it's a big number still. Number three, yes, I can understand that people do become frustrated when they are looking for an aspiration and they have to wait. That's true. But again, that means it's important that we demonstrate to Georgians that we're on the right track, that we're making progress, we're not stagnating, we're going in the right direction. There is more NATO today in Georgia than there's ever been, and we've got lots of ideas for the future. And if we can show that dynamic, that the journey is happening, then I think we'll find that we'll be at 65% next year and the year afterwards, and then all the way on the journey. So let's not exaggerate, but let's also say that it's a good reason, again, to make it clear that because there is not NATO membership today, we are not sitting on our hands doing nothing. We're working in that direction.
In 2008, at the NATO summit, Vladimir Putin hinted that if Georgia and Ukraine will be included to the alliance, there will be consequences in the form of military actions.
Yeah.
And Georgia was not accepted, and MAP was never given to Georgia or Ukraine, and war broke in Georgia and in Ukraine as well. So can you say that this active cooperation with the NATO is the biggest threat for Georgia and Ukraine than real membership that
No.
can ensure the security of the country?
No, I believe the modernization of the Georgian army, the NATO presence here, all that we're carrying out means that Georgia is in a much better position today to stand up to any threat than it was in 2008. That's the first thing. Number two, look at your history. A few years ago, there were two neutral states close to you. One was called Ukraine, neutral state, and one is Moldova. They were neutral. They did not want to join NATO. They were being occupied by Russian forces. Russia annexed Ukraine at a time when it had no vocation to join NATO. So in other words, if you say to Russia, oh, I don't want to join NATO and I will remain neutral, they still occupy you. So I think that is a golden lesson for all of those people that say that your security is better outside NATO, that you cannot trust Russia to respect your neutrality. Look at the historical record and then decide what's the best option for you.
Yeah, but NATO called Russia a threat. Russia called NATO a threat. And who will protect in reality these countries in the middle who strive to enter the alliance, but they're still waiting for this political decision of the NATO members?
Yes, but as I've said before, we're not sitting on our hands. We're working, for example, a lot with Ukraine at the moment, also similar things to what we're doing here. We have a mission in Kiev to help improve the armed forces. We've got a lot of bilateral programs, like you have the bilateral program with the United States here. So if I take, the security sort of thermometer of Georgia, I could see, the temperature going up and up and up every day. That's the direction that we are moving in. The closer we become, the better for your security. At the end of the day, it's true that the NATO Article 5 guarantee, it's true, applies to NATO members, that's clear, and no country in the alliance has been attacked, which shows that that Article 5 guarantee actually works. But in the meantime, we're doing a lot to help your security and we're going in the right direction. So to my mind, this is not the time to change course. In fact, the government is not going to change course. You know where you want to go. The best thing for your security is knowing where you want to go. It's not changing direction every 5 minutes and creating confusion.
But Russian propaganda always uses this helping to develop security, this active cooperation between the NATO and countries, Georgia or Ukraine, as a threat to Russian borders. They call it the threat to Russian borders. They also mentioned some promises that were given by the NATO in early 90s to Russian leaders not to move NATO borders closer to Russia. Do you know about these promises, what they mean?
Yeah, I'm an old man. So
do you agree? Do you agree that NATO actions in Georgia and this cooperation and actions on the borders of Russia, provoking Russia to start these military actions with Georgia or Ukraine, as they say it?
Look, the historical record is important here. First of all, no guarantee was ever given to the Soviet Union, as it then was, that NATO would not enlarge. Because that would have been a bad thing, because that would have said that NATO would have said to a country like Poland or Lithuania, we are going to dictate what you can do with your foreign policy. Was that the new Europe that we wanted to build after the Cold War, where we said to countries, sorry, but because of Russia or history, you have to be in a sphere of influence? That would have encouraged Russia's imperialist ambitions, believe me, not have contained those ambitions. So no, rightly, we said after the Cold War, there is a fundamental principle in Europe, which is every country has the democratic right to choose to be a member of an alliance or not to be a member of the alliance. Free choice. Secondly, very important, for 25 years, we enlarged NATO, but we did not move any NATO troops, no NATO nuclear weapons, no infrastructure close to Russia's borders. There were no military implications of NATO enlargement for Russia. This all began after they annexed the Crimea in 2014, and that was a period which was very good for Russia. Russia was part of the NATO-Russia Council, dialogue with the European Union, joined the Council of Europe. Millions of Russians traveled as tourists. The standard of living of Russians went up. The period of cooperation with NATO was the best period for Russian democracy, for the freedom of the press, for Russian prosperity. Since Crimea, freedom of the press, prosperity, All of those things have got worse in Russia for the average Russian citizen. Mr. Putin may be happy, but millions of Russians are not very happy. So, look at the historical facts. There is absolutely no evidence that NATO has ever posed a threat to Russia. The Russians are the source of their own problems because of this imperialist thinking. NATO has done nothing factually to contribute to that situation. They've isolated themselves.
The Russian government calls the supply of weapons, I mean French air defense systems or American Javelin to Georgia, once again a threat to their security. Why do you think America and France allowed to supply these weapons to Georgia after 10 years after the war, when actually active threat no longer exists at the moment?
Well, look, Russia supplies thousands of weapons to an enormous number of countries, and never accepts any criticism from anybody that it's not contributing to other people's security. So I would not believe that this argument holds any water at all. It's the right of Georgia to defend itself, and it's the right of NATO countries to help Georgia to defend itself. NATO does not have, as NATO, a role in the supply of weapons. It's left to NATO countries, but it's clear to me that a Javelin weapon or an air defense system is defensive. It's not for attacking anybody, it's helping Georgia to be better defended. So it's a perfect right under international law for Georgia to receive that type of military assistance from its friends.
They also call these weapons, the supply of these weapons to Georgia, some kind of compensation for not providing Georgia NATO membership. Do you agree with this?
No, absolutely not, because have we given up all of the other things that we're doing? Once we supplied the Javelin mission weapons, did we stop the activity of our NATO liaison office? Did we close down our joint transformation evaluation centre? Have we stopped planning for an exercise in 2019? Obviously not. No, this is part and parcel of the efforts by NATO and the allies to help Georgia to modernise its armed forces and to be better able to defend itself. It's not either or.
How do you see the future development of cooperation between NATO and Georgia, especially considering this aggressive reaction of the major regional player?
Well, I think we have a big poster that was invented in the UK during the Second World War. It says, "Keep calm and carry on."
What can we wait from the upcoming summit?
Well, I think that the clear thing will be a recognition, a high-level recognition, very visible, very public recognition of two things. First of all, the excellent progress that Georgia has made towards NATO membership, meeting the standards of NATO membership, a recognition also of the support that Georgia gives us in Afghanistan, where you've had many combat casualties, and we appreciate this very, very highly. You share the burden. You're a provider of security, not just a consumer of security. So a recognition of that. And the second part, a confirmation that the door is open, and our commitment of 2008 that Georgia will be a member of NATO still stands.
Thank you for the interview.
Thank you, sir.